standards are technically extensible and they're changeable. However, these changes, they have to happen through consensus. Otherwise, the changes don't really get adopted at scale and they don't actually happen.
Welcome to Podland, the last word in podcasting news. It's Thursday, the 14th of July, 2022. I'm James Cridland, the editor of Pod News.
And I'm Sam Sethi, the MD of River Radio, the Podverse radio station.
Hi, this is Mitch Downey, and I'll be on later to talk about Podverse.
And I am Michael Mignano, and later I'll be talking about the standards innovation paradox.
They will. Podland is sponsored by Buzzsprout, podcast hosting made easy. Last week, 3,157 people started a podcast with Buzzsprout. Now there's Buzzsprout ads to grow your podcast wherever it's hosted. And we're sponsored by Squadcast, the remote recording tool that creators love. Squadcast has just launched version 5 with new features and a new look, and we're using it right now.
Podland is where James and I review this week's top podcasting stories covered on Pod News. Podland supports both transcripts and chapters, but if your app doesn't, grab a new podcast app from podnews.net/new podcast apps.
Yes, and you'll also find all the links to the stories in our show notes and previous shows and interviews at podland.news and daily podcast news at podnews.net.
Okay, so the story we're going to start off with, James, is about standards innovation paradox. It seems it's the story that's going around everywhere today. Michael Mignano, who's just left Spotify, the former founder of Anchor, has written a piece about what he calls the standards innovation paradox. A good piece, but you had the chance to talk to him.
I did, yeah. I thought it was a good read, and I think we'll dive into what we think in a bit. But first, I caught up with Michael Mignano earlier today, and I asked him to explain the idea.
So the standards innovation paradox is this dynamic that takes place when standards on the internet are adopted at scale. Basically, what I've sort of observed is that, first of all, standards are awesome. They serve as a common language for software and hardware and products that are basically built by different stakeholders to communicate through a common language without having to reinvent the wheel every time. And so through this common language, it drastically reduces the barrier to entry for products that want to interface with an ecosystem that adopts these standards. This is great because it ultimately leads to lots of products and services for consumers, which leads to choice, oftentimes data portability, and lots of other benefits. Many of the internet's greatest inventions, I would argue, would not be possible without standards, right? Things like HTTP and SMTP and web browsing, etc. What happens, though, is these standards, when they're successful, they get adopted at scale, and it makes it really hard for them to be changed because the stakeholders that have all adopted the standards at scale oftentimes have different interests from one another. And I should mention, I didn't mention this up front, standards are technically extensible and they're changeable. However, these changes, they have to happen through consensus. Otherwise, the changes don't really get adopted at scale and they don't actually happen. So this paradox that I talk about is this dynamic that plays out at scale. When a standard breaks through and it gains massive adoption, it then becomes very, very hard to change, and the market that it effectively powers stagnates in terms of innovation because nobody can come to an agreement about what the changes to the standards should be at scale. That's the standards innovation paradox.
Yeah, and it's a great article. It's a very persuasive article. And so essentially you're saying that standards help you start, but they quickly become constraining when you want to push at the boundaries of something. You give a good example of Substack in there.
Yeah, exactly. That's exactly what happens. I mean, Substack is, as you mentioned, a newsletter product. It enables creators to build, host, and scale newsletters that get delivered to readers over email, which is brilliant, right? Because the standard of SMTP has reached scale. It's adopted by literally billions of people. And so you can reach billions of people if you build a product based on SMTP. The challenge is, however, you can only do as much as the standard of SMTP allows. Otherwise, you either have to change the standard, which again, incredibly hard, or you have to break the standard, in which case you lose the benefits of the standard. So Substack did something recently that in the context of this paradox, I thought was smart, but not necessarily surprising, which is they launched an app. Substack has built its business off of delivery of newsletters through email, but now they have an app, which they are, it seems clear to me that they're trying to drive readers and creators to the app, which makes sense because they can do a lot more in the app, right? They can do rich, dynamic things in the emails that they probably can't do in a standard email client. But the downside to all of this is the paradox. They now lose the ability to reach literally billions of people where they're already reading email every day. And so they're faced with this challenge.
And Dropbox is probably another example here as well, I guess, of something where, FTP and rsync and those sorts of things are fine and they're great standards and great technology, but actually Dropbox, has piled a ton more features onto that. Exactly.
Dropbox has all sorts of interesting and unique and very valuable and free features, I would say, for consumers. Of course, all of these things come with trade-offs, right? So I use Dropbox, maybe you use Dropbox, I use Google Drive, etc. But now all my files are in the hands of one single entity, which I don't think will go away, but could go away someday, right? And now I don't have access to my files anymore. So the paradox doesn't just affect companies and the products and the teams that are building these products, but they ultimately affect the end users as well. So it's this really fascinating dynamic that I've just thought a lot about over the years because I experienced it firsthand building Anchor. Podcasts, which are based on RSS, another standard, are also a victim of this paradox in many ways. And so, it's a topic that I've thought a lot about. I'm really interested in it, and I thought I would write this piece about it.
Yeah.
I'm glad you read it. I appreciate it.
Yeah, no, it was really interesting. And I think, my co-host Sam Sethi read your piece, and he used to work in the past for Mozilla, and he said this is exactly what Microsoft used to say about browser innovation. But now, of course, working together, standards are now allowing multiple browsers to coexist. And he goes on to say, I expect Spotify don't want others to exist. Now, you don't work for Spotify anymore. You're investing into a ton of different companies. But are there business benefits to not follow standards?
I think it depends, and I think it's extremely case by case. I think with Mozilla, obviously I've never worked for Mozilla, I've never worked for Google, Chrome, or anything like that. I think in many ways it probably benefits those businesses to leverage the standards of HTTP, let's say, because it enables them to ingest all of the world's internet content right into their browsers. But there are probably also times where those companies, again, this is me just speculating, there are probably times when those companies are saying to themselves, well, wouldn't it be great if we could do X? Well, we can't do X unless we build it proprietary in our own ecosystem. And so, Chrome is an example. I haven't used Mozilla in a while, but I'm sure they have similar features. Chrome has a plugin store, and Chrome has, secure password storage, and all of these things that don't interact with the standard of HTTP. And so, I think it's totally case by case based on what the business is trying to achieve, and probably also the point of maturity of which the business is at. Right? I imagine early stage businesses. I'll just use Anchor as an example. It was a great thing for us to tap into the power of RSS in the early days of Anchor back in 2018.
But actually, on Anchor, you actually launched Anchor with a closed standard. I mean, the original product was all around having conversations with others
right.
using audio. I used to show it off as being the future of radio. Just goes to show how much I know. And it was a great product. But then you pivoted to open RSS and podcasting. When you left, Anchor was the biggest podcast host by far, 3 times bigger than their closest competitor. Didn't standards actually make that product?
Absolutely. Yeah. Standards are what enabled us to distribute podcasts on behalf of creators far and wide and enable creators to get heard in places like Spotify, like Apple Podcasts. And that's why Anchor, from the beginning, when we made that pivot, to your point, has supported RSS. And although I don't work at Spotify anymore, I do know that they still support RSS because it's critically important to have broad distribution for creators. And so, I get to this in the piece, but I actually think it's possible to do both. We talked about Mozilla and Chrome, and I think those are great examples of doing both. I imagine Substack won't eliminate the ability to read newsletters in email. I think Substack will ultimately probably have a better experience in their app, but it won't come at the expense of the standardized version, which is the email version. And this is actually, I think, a great example of this having been pulled off really well is probably Imessage, right? So Imessage is Apple's text messaging product, or at least that's how I would say it started, right? And the funny thing about Imessage is it didn't win as a messaging client because it was the best messaging client. It won because it basically piggybacked off of a really successful smartphone. And by having it just baked into a smartphone that had millions and millions of people adopting it, they were able to distribute, at the time, what was kind of a commoditized product, right? I mean, a text messaging app is about the most commoditized thing you can have because it is based on the standard. But as we know, iMessage now also has all of these super rich features, right? It's got disappearing voice memos and rich support for groups and all these photo features and all these fun things. But if you text message someone on Android, what happens? Everyone knows it turns green because it's falling back to the standard. And so I guess that's a long-winded way of saying I think it's possible to do both, and I think that is the best outcome for products and consumers.
But I think also iMessage is deliberately marking people as having Android phones with the green message.
For FOMO,
because they want to, because they want to show that it's a, they're lesser people and they don't have the same functions as you do, and all of that. And I wonder, the EU is very against iMessage and is having conversations with Apple at the moment about wanting to open that, and that's a classic case, I would say, of product lock-in. It's Apple who could have opened iMessage to be a standard for people using Android, but deliberately didn't, because they know that is one reason that people buy Apple phones rather than Android phones. And I wonder whether the essay that you wrote is essentially trying to build in product lock-in rather than a conversation around standards.
Well, again, the article that I wrote is actually suggesting, in the end, I basically offer two solutions to this paradox. One thing is, again, you can't compete on the standard, because at scale, all products that adopt standards will eventually look roughly the same, because there's effectively a ceiling unless you can get the standard to change, as we discussed, which is very, very hard due to consensus. So that's one suggestion. And then the second suggestion, like I said, is actually interoperability with the standard. Standards are great, right? Because, again, they offer consumers choice, and they also enable users to move to different products, ideally without losing access to their data. And so what I think the solution to this problem is actually not to lock in. It's actually to maintain interoperability with the standard. That's my suggestion. Now, it's hard to do these things. That's why it's a paradox. There's a tension there, right?
Yeah.
That's why these markets often stagnate. But the best teams ultimately find a way to do both, I think, based on those two factors I mentioned in the end of the article.
Yeah, so how do we fix that? There's clearly a problem with the mechanism around standard setting, and I come from broadcast radio, and I'll tell you, if you want conversations around standards, I can bore you for many, many years on that. We remember in the podcasting world, we remember the long, slow standards process for IAB, for podcast plays and listens. But I've also seen on the other side the folks at the Podcast Index innovating really fast, moving very fast, possibly breaking a few things, but working on a bunch of different standards for their namespace. Is there anything that standards organizations can do to slow down this, the frustration that you clearly feel in terms of moving standards on?
So I haven't spent too much time checking out the Podcast Index. I've read a little bit about it, and I was tweeting back and forth with them today. And I'm supportive of what they're doing, and I hope it gains traction. It sounds like it is gaining traction. The tricky thing I see,
it'd be really good if 30% market share company. Do you know anybody at Apple?
I do, actually. All kidding aside, I think something like the Podcast Index highlights what I think the challenge is, right? So the podcast index I'm just using them as an example. I don't know much about it. But if there's a product or an entity or that wants to make a bunch of changes to a standard, that's great. But consumers ultimately don't feel the benefits of those changes unless this huge swath of stakeholders adopt the changes and basically update the standard. Now, credit to Podcast Index. I was like I said, I was chatting with them earlier, and it sounds like that's not actually their goal. They just want this thing to freely exist in an open market and let the market sort it out. But the reality is that unless all of the stakeholders of a standard agree to do this thing, or at least a critical mass of them, the end users of a certain standard will never feel the changes, and that's unfortunate. So back to your question. I mean, I think the best way to probably handle this is to make changes. If you're a team or you're a product that believes in a change to a standard, it's probably to go ahead and break the standard and make the change, but again, while maintaining backwards compatibility. That way you won't alienate your users, and then the market can decide for itself if this change to the standard is great and worthy of being integrated across the entire ecosystem. That's probably the way to do it, because I agree standards bodies are great, but again, to your point about in radio, they're just slow. They're just really, really slow. And I think that's why you end up with, going back to the SMS example, there was one major innovation in SMS over like a period of like 10 years. It took 10 years to add pictures to text messaging.
Yeah, and in the end with SMS, of course, Google ended up having to bully most of the mobile phone, companies to basically go, we'll do RCS if you won't, because we kind of have to move on. So it's really interesting. One last question, if you don't mind.
Sure.
What's next after leaving Spotify? You're clearly active. Your brain is clearly active. Your bio now says that you are an investor. So you're investing in a ton of different companies. What's next for you?
Yeah, so right now I'm taking some time off, hanging out with my family, my daughters, my wife, which is great because obviously building a company and then selling it and integration, super time consuming. So I'm taking some much needed time with the family. But yeah, I've been angel investing for a couple of years. I really, really enjoy it because one of the things I loved most about building Anchor was actually the early days. It was the 0 to 1 type work where, you have nothing but an idea or a concept or a prototype, and you're thinking and strategizing and moving really quickly to ship impactful products that users love to ultimately get to scale. I love that. And so I've really enjoyed angel investing in, a bunch of really exciting and promising companies and working closely with those founders to help them figure out that 0 to 1 moment. And so my next role is actually going to be a full-time investing role, which I will be announcing in the coming months.
Very cool. Very cool. Well, Mike, thank you so much for your time. You talk about your family. I know that you have things planned, so I won't keep you. But thank you so much for giving us your time today.
Thanks, James. This was great. Take care.
So that was Michael Mignano earlier today, at least earlier today my time. I got up very early for that. What's your take on the standards innovation paradox, Sam?
To be fair to Michael, he's not saying anything that isn't fairly true in terms of standards get set over a period of time and then they become rock solid and they get very rarely changed. I mean, his examples for SMTP, HTML, and etc. Yeah, that is true. But obviously, while they're forming, they are very liquid, and it's in that period of liquidity that I think people can, have their input. And it's a shame that companies like Apple and Spotify aren't inputting to the RSS extension that's going on right now.
Yeah, I mean, I guess, in general, I think I would agree with what he says. Once you do everything that a standard says you can do, it's really hard to innovate further. And the Dropbox, conversation was a really, obvious one there. But I do think that that's where if you're lazy or if you want to lock people into using your product, you just basically put lots of proprietary stuff in there and, and that's the way. I think, though, RSS is a bit of an outlier because of namespaces, which essentially allow you to add new tags in a backwards compatible way. So I did a little bit of history, and I went back and I've written a long, tedious article in reply, which basically points out when you have a look back at the RSS feeds that were written in early 2005, there weren't things like thumbnails in there. There weren't things like categories in there. The people who basically took the standard and enhanced it was Apple. And Apple jumped in and said, no, we would like thumbnails, and we'll have the iTunes namespace, as it's still called, and categories and all of that kind of stuff. And so, this is the very thing that Mike says is impossible, to take a standard and to enhance it. And Apple, obviously innovated that again in 2017, adding, tags like trailers and setting the order of your shows and stuff. And Spotify didn't end up doing that. And I think, if you have a look at video podcasting as an example, we'll talk about video podcasting in a little bit, but video podcasting, Spotify's actually done a nice thing with video podcasting. They've enabled a thing so that you can switch between video and audio, and it's the same file, and that's all good. And that's probably the way that video podcasting should work, so you don't end up having two separate RSS feeds. But the way that Spotify decided to do that was throw away RSS, do something proprietary that you can only do if you're hosting with Anchor. And I think that, Mike's thought pattern there was we have to build it with proprietary tech because we can't evolve the standard. But I reckon, they've got a 30% market share. They probably can evolve that standard. But they could have taken the alternate enclosure tag, which exists. They could have molded that to their own use. Or they could have launched a Spotify podcast namespace. Would have been slightly less optimal, but at the very least, that would have enabled anyone to push video podcasts into Spotify. And perhaps the reason is that they actually don't want that, because they just want people locked into using Anchor and or Megaphone, and that's what their business model is.
Yeah, I liken Apple and Spotify to black holes. They take data in, but they let nothing out. And that's the problem with them. I mean, if you put your data in, even if you use the proprietary elements of Spotify, you couldn't export an RSS feed out of it into another application. It's a dead end, and that's the problem. The other thing that I thought was telling was that Mike didn't even have an awareness of the podcast index extension work until probably recently, and that's more worrying as well. That people who
maybe until Dave started tweeting him.
Yeah, and this I've seen so often. My wife used to run MSN, and I was asked to go in to talk to some of the product marketing people at Microsoft at the time about Web 2.0. They hadn't heard of half the companies that were doing. They didn't know some of this technology that was going on. They formally really are involved in two things: spreadsheets, KPIs, user numbers, and share price. That's probably one of their biggest things that they look at. And at the end of the day, they do become very, very myopic to their own environment. And that's the sad thing about corporates. You very rarely look above the parapet and see around what else is innovating and what's going on. And clearly Spotify are doing that.
Yeah, maybe. I mean, I think you can have a look at polls, for example, in podcasting, and Spotify have polls, so you can, get some feedback from your audience. But and I think that they will be really easy to do in terms of JSON, a JSON reference in your RSS feed that basically says what the poll questions are, when it closes, where to send the results, blah blah blah. I think that would be a really easy namespace extension to write. But of course, what Spotify did is they made it that you can only do polls through Anchor. And so Matt Deegan tweeted and basically said, in order to use polls in podcasting, which they would like to do, they would have had to have moved all of the podcasts that he looks after to Anchor. And he doesn't want to do that because he gets a lot of benefit from the podcast host who he's currently with, and, advertising and everything else. So, again, I think if they'd worked on that standard, more people would be using polls. Spotify would be the number one place to be because they would have had that poll stuff built in. and potentially Apple wouldn't, and potentially Pocket Cast wouldn't, or any of the other apps at least initially. But Spotify could have actually set that standard. So, but I can also see, on Mike's other point coming from broadcast radio, as I said, I think it's sometimes very hard to get standards changed, but perhaps standards enhanced is a bit of a different conversation.
Yeah, well, Adam Curry on Twitter was less than impressed, I think. I think his reaction was, Spotify is the coin of podcasting.
Yes. Thank you, Adam, for testing the beeper. I appreciate that. Yes, I don't think Adam is... Adam also said, I just laughed and moved on when he saw that article. But, and maybe, to be fair, maybe that's one of the reasons why Spotify hasn't engaged too much in Podcast Index, because obviously Adam is not that pro Spotify, and maybe there's a personal, issue there as well. I don't know, but so it's so that's a shame, and it's a shame that Spotify hasn't sort of been a little bit more interested in setting standards. I mean, interestingly, they've just piled some money into a fund around open source software. So maybe we might see a few changes now that there are quite a few different names at the top of Spotify, but who knows?
It's a question I ask of Spotify every time, James, and you might know the answer. Who's in charge of their podcasting strategy?
Oh, well, there we go. Michael's replacement, and I forget her name, but Michael's replacement will obviously be in charge of the anchor bit, but then, somebody else is in charge of the app. And I know this because they have a different PR person. So therefore, and then somebody else is in charge of the advertising. So I think you make a good point. There is lots of people in charge. But who is overall in charge of that strategy? Maybe it's Daniel, I don't know, or maybe it's somebody else.
Yeah, and I think that's the most telling part. When we went to the Spotify party, I had the same question to several Spotify people internally, and most of them couldn't tell me the answer either.
You went to a Spotify party?
Yeah. I snuck in. They didn't know who I was. Yeah. I wasn't James Cridland.
That'll be it. Journalists weren't invited. So, I think you did well. You did well. Spotify have made some announcements as well recently, haven't they?
Yeah, they're expanding their ability to post video podcasts for creators in 6 new countries, including Germany, France, Italy, Spain, Brazil, and Mexico. It marks the first time the audio streaming company is making this feature available to non-English speaking countries. So, again, I assume this is their own proprietary video standard, though. It
is indeed, and you can see that they're busy doing that, and that makes sense. They've also signed up Tony and Ryan. Now, Tony and Ryan are radio people here in Australia. Ryan is on a breakfast show, I think, for a radio station in Melbourne. May have got that wrong. Not really heard of him, to be honest. Tony works within radio as well. They've both jacked their jobs in to do their podcast full time. It's a multi-year, multi-million-dollar contract, and it becomes exclusive on August the 8th. What I think is interesting here is, firstly, Spotify basically told Tony and Ryan, you will be doing some video. And I've heard Tony saying that she will be learning how the video systems work and all of that. So that's going to be very much learning as she ends up doing that. But the other thing that I find interesting is that these are radio people. They're represented by a radio talent company called March Media, who's run by a guy called Brad March, who looks after quite a few of the very large radio hosts here. And in previous emails to me, he's been just really excited about the possibilities of podcasting. I'm sure he's particularly excited about the possibilities now that Spotify have handed him a great big fat check. But interesting seeing that Spotify are signing new people now to do podcasts on their platform.
Of course, if March Media wants to sign me and you, I'll give up my radio job and and I'll take an exclusive on Spotify every day. Yeah. I'll be sell out.
Yeah. Why not? And Spotify have also bought something else, haven't they? I was unaware of this.
Yeah, so was I. Maybe because I don't do Wordle, but Spotify has bought Hurdle, a Wordle-like game that challenges players to guess a popular song. I did go and try it. Basically, you've got 6 goes at trying to guess the song. You know, again, it's
a game of beat the intro, isn't it? Basically.
Yeah, and it's fun, and I can imagine people doing it in groups. And but I can't.
Tom Webster likes that sort of thing. He's a big fan of. He's a big fan of it. Oh, I did it in 3 seconds today. That's not a Tom Webster impersonation.
Yes, it was.
And that makes perfect sense. Actually, Spotify buying a service like a Hurdle, because obviously, if you hear the intro of a song and you go, "Oh, what a brilliant song that was," then actually it fits very nicely into Spotify. We'll go and take a listen. So. It remains a standalone website for now, they say, but you can imagine that it will be integrated into the Spotify app at some point in the future.
Yeah, I just can't see how or where. I mean, they're struggling to integrate podcasting and live. Where would you integrate this? Anyway, good luck to whoever's got that job.
Indeed.
Now, last week, while you were away, over here in Blighty, I had Harry Duran on as co-host, and we talked about Podverse, great app that's using the live item tag, and they've included video as an option as well, but they've used the standards from the podcast index. So I thought I'd reach out to Mitch Downey, the founder or one of the co-founders, and ask him, what is the live item tag?
The live item tag is a great way for podcasters to broadcast their live stream to every app simultaneously. So rather than going through exclusive platforms to configure the live stream in all these different platforms, let's say you've got YouTube, Twitch, Facebook, Twitter, all of these different platforms. Currently, they have to configure those streams and sometimes start and stop them individually. With the live item tag, by distributing live streams through RSS, they only have to share their live stream in one place, and then every app can pick up on it and broadcast it from there.
Let's just take a quick break.
Mornings are always tough. Between getting up and dressed, getting your family ready for the day, and fighting traffic on the way to work, who has the time to sit down and just watch the news? Well, now I'm bringing the news to you. I'm Jeremy Scott, host and executive producer of the daily news podcast called Sunrise Brief. I'm an Emmy Award-winning journalist who left more than a decade in television news to start a podcast that gives you the top headlines all in 10 minutes or less. You can listen to Sunrise Brief on Apple Podcasts, Spotify, Amazon Music, and more. Search for Sunrise Brief and make sure you're always in the know. Let's get this day started.
And have you seen a good pickup in people using that tag now?
Yes, we have exclusively had people use it for audio live streams. In the Podcasting 2.0 community, it's early adopters. There's about 10 podcasts that are currently using it. And they've had good success, as far as I can tell. In the process, it not only will broadcast the stream, but it'll push a notification to people's phones to let them know that this stream is going live. And they tap that, and it opens right up in Podverse, and they can listen to it from there.
Now, obviously, you mentioned audio there, but you've just started to support video as well within Podverse.
Podcasting has supported video for a long time. It's just not as widely adopted in podcast apps, but it's there. And especially with live streams, so many live streams today are video, not just audio. So it seemed like a good time to add video support as well. And we have tested live streams with video on our own, but it's been mostly developers just putting on a video stream and making sure it works. But the infrastructure's there. It's ready to go.
Now, is this using the medium tag within the RSS 2.0 extension?
It's a combination of the medium tag and existing RSS standards, like what the file type is. If it's an MP4, for example, we assume it's video. If it's an MP3, we assume it's audio and play it that way.
Now, are you reliant on hosts to support this? Is it host driven and you as the client exposing that? Is that the key requirement?
Well, the requirement is that the live stream information is in the podcaster's RSS feed. So in podcasting 2.0, people are willing to roll up their sleeves and put it in manually and be our early adopters. But this process can be made much simpler if RSS hosts add it to their interface to start and stop your live stream.
Do you know of any hosts that are going to be doing that soon?
I have talked to one. I don't know if he wants me to go public with his work because it's not live yet.
Okay. Now, when did Podverse start?
Oh boy, like 9 years ago. And I was super into the world of podcasting, and I found I couldn't share it with other people because they didn't know what I was listening to and what I was talking about. So there weren't really any good clip sharing apps at that time. So set upon this mission to create the best clip sharing app we could. Now, over the course of that, we wanted it to be more than just a clip sharing app because in order to do that well, we don't want to have to juggle two different apps, bounce from one to the other. So it kind of organically turned into something much bigger than that, which now we have a whole bunch of features and it's a fully functional podcast app.
Given the roadmap of where you're going, we had Oscar Merry on from Fountain last week talking about value for value and paying for people's time and attention. So Fountain are now paying you to listen to podcasts. Where do you sit currently within the whole value for value chain? I know I was talking to Moritz from Olby earlier about your support of value for value, but do you see yourselves going one step further and starting to do what Fountain have done and paying people to listen?
No, that wouldn't be in our plans. We're trying to make the best podcast app we can. We will never add advertisements. We'll never sell people's data. It's just not within our scope where we're going to start paying people. But we are enabled for value on our website, as you mentioned, with Alby. Mm-hmm. And it's not just Alby. It's actually a standard called WebLN. And what that means is that the way we share value for value on our website can be compatible with every Bitcoin wallet that follows the WebLN standard. So Alby is blazing the trail, and they're leading to adoption of this standard. And it's open source wallet. We really like it. So it'll work today. What you would do is you'd go to the Podverse website, go to a podcast like Podland, which I believe is value for value enabled.
It is, yes.
And you will see a form on the podcast page that lets you enter the amount of Bitcoin you want to send. And also, optionally, you could send a message with that. And value for value fits in very well with video live streams because one concept that exists currently is called super chats. This is, if you're familiar with the live streaming world, you've probably heard of super chats. And what they are, messages you pay to send to the podcaster. And then it arrives in real time and they can read the message on the show or make it appear on the screen or however they want to interact.
This week on Podland, we've got an interview with Mike Mignano. Mike formerly started Anchor, which was sold to Spotify, as you probably know, Mitch. And last week left Spotify. I think he may be on what they call gardening leave, or the golden handcuffs have been removed, whatever they may be. But he's out of Spotify, right? And the first thing he writes in Medium is a post that says, RSS is great. It's what made Anchor so valuable so quickly, but it's slow, it's proprietary. And if you want to go faster, you've got to go proprietary in a closed system. What are your thoughts?
Well, I don't think that's accurate at all. And I think that sort of interpretation is led by these corporate companies that want exclusive rights to podcasts. So what Spotify, for example, would like is that everybody uses Spotify and isn't sharing their podcast broader than that. And it's in their business motivations to do so. Well, with Podverse, we don't have an exclusivity agenda. We want to help support podcasting be as open as possible. And RSS is still to this day the best option podcasters have available for that.
It is, and I mean, the great work that Dave and Adam have been doing, as you said, and some of the stuff that you've been involved in helping as well, shapen, which is the RSS 2.0 extension. So Mike was a little bit naughty not to reference it within his piece. He knows he's going to be well read, given what he's done, and not to reference it that there is an alternative to the closed proprietary Spotify world, I think was a little bit disingenuous, personally.
Yeah, and we don't expect these large corporations to talk about the value of RSS feeds, and we don't want to wait for permission from them to innovate in these directions. Our goal is to help people reach as many people as possible in the easiest way possible. And RSS is superior to going into all of these individual platforms and maintaining them separately.
Look, I'm old enough to remember being in the browser wars when I was at Netscape versus Microsoft, and nothing actually stopped either company innovating. And then what happened was the market dictated what was the best of those innovations to build forward into the browsers. And eventually there was a unified standard, HTML5. I look at the likes of Apple, Spotify, and Google and think, look, you've got deeper pockets than, the bottom of the deep blue sea. So they could come up with new ideas and innovations, apply it to a very big mass market that does use their platforms, and then get adoption and then apply that across other platforms to create a standard. So there is nothing that I think stops companies of that size and nature building out new tech and helping the whole industry.
I agree with that. I mean, with all the money these organizations have, they could advance the RSS standard far beyond where it is currently. But again, it does not seem to be in their business interest to do so. It doesn't seem to be the agenda they want. So that's up for us to do in the community, to do it ourselves and make new features possible in podcasting.
It's a thought that I had about Apple and Spotify, but let me ask you first. Do you support PodPing?
Yes, we do. And PodPing is essential to the live item tag, the way that it works. So an RSS feed is basically the center of truth for your podcast. All of your podcast information is available through your RSS feed. That doesn't have a notification component. So with a live stream, we need to know in real time this show is going live. PodPing allows us to do that. So with our servers, we are set up to listen to PodPing. And whenever it sends a notification that this stream is going live, we then reparse the RSS feed and then send a notification to users and update it on our website and in our app.
So, I mean, there's nothing stopping Apple, Spotify, Google, or any of the others supporting this or any of the other standards if they really wanted to.
No, and it's unfortunate because it saves a lot of energy. What happens without PodPing is we have all of these servers parsing continuously, trying to find updates in RSS feeds. And it's a wasteful process, and it's something you can't do as quickly if you just have to guess, okay, let's check again. Has it updated? PodPing solves that problem, and it does it in a open source, decentralized, it's public, so it's accessible to any app and RSS hosts.
Now, so far in our conversation, I've not heard of how you make money.
Well, yeah, so since we won't add advertisements or sell your data, we have a premium model. We try to give it away as many features as we can for free, but more advanced features like syncing your queue or your history or what is currently playing across all of your devices, features like that require our servers. And so we have to save data to our servers, and that can be a costly part of the process. So we do have a premium option where people can sign up and pay $18 a year to get those features. Now, that said, $18 a year to Americans may be very different than $18 a year to people all across the world. And we don't want to be exclusive. If people write us and say, hey, we'd love to use premium features, but this is just too much money. I mean, frankly, if we can verify a real person, we'd like to give you a free year of premium as well.
Brilliant. Well done. Now, you're very deep into the understanding of podcasting, clearly. How do we fix some of the issues that still sit out there? There's 4.3 million, give or take, whatever, a million, depending on which platform you talk to. Discovery is one of those challenges. Interactivity is another one of the challenges. How do you think we should overcome these problems?
Interactivity can be addressed with podcasting 2.0 standards, like the value for value boostograms, which is the messages you can send with a donation. There's also in the works live chat options so that live chats can be within podcast apps in a decentralized way through the RSS feed. And there's other ways too. For example, you can render different chapters to list what the content is at various points in the podcast. And you can make interactive links. So you can change the album artwork when a chapter is loaded, and you can make it an interactive link. So there are more options for podcasters for interactivity that they're looking for.
If no one's ever used an app that is not Spotify or Apple, they're not going to be aware of these things, are they? So I guess it's beholden to the whole industry to try and make people more aware of it. Last question then, Mitch. What's the plan going forward for Podverse? Where do you see yourselves in the next year, 2 years?
Well, the plan is to keep charging forward with podcasting 2.0 features. And hopefully we'll see more adoption of things like live stream from some major RSS hosts or soon to be major RSS hosts. We're in a place right now where we're getting a lot of positive feedback from people. And I think we need to raise more awareness for what we're doing and continue to stabilize the app and add new features.
You said one word there that made me think, raise. Will you raise a round of funding? Would you want to go out and raise a bigger round maybe of funding to try and accelerate your growth plans?
We're open to raising funding. It just has to be in a way that fits within our principles. We're not driven by making as much money as possible, and that informs our design decisions to just focus on what is best for podcasters and listeners. It's not always the case that large investors are looking for that necessarily. They're looking for a return on their investment. Now, if investors are interested in this mission, we're certainly open to those conversations. But if not, we feel good about where we're at and the progress we're making. I actually think that we release new features faster than these large platforms. So we're comfortable with where we're at, and we have seen a large uptick in our traffic and premium subscription in the past 2 months as I've gone on some more podcasts, and people have also helped raise awareness for us, people who we're doing and want it to be a bigger thing.
So let's end up with Mitch. Where can they find Podverse? What's the URL?
Podverse.fm, and that is our website, and you can download us on iOS, Android, and F-Droid.
Mitch, thank you so much for your time. Great app, great product. Go out and use it. Go and try it. It is at the bleeding edge of where this stuff's going on. So congratulations to you and your team and your co-founders. Catch up with you soon, hopefully.
All right. Thanks, Sam.
Do you think we'll ever do a live show, Sam, in the future? Do you think we'll ever get lit?
No. Have you seen the number of times we've edited this so far? No.
No, there was talk, wasn't there, about us doing the show live at the podcast show in London, and thankfully the organisers forgot about that.
Is that because we sold no tickets?
Probably just as well.
Yes.
So there we go. Oh, we've got some quick news, haven't we? Already quick news. Gosh, yes. There's not been much going on, have there? Marco Arment, the developer of Overcast, he's a bit upset, isn't he?
Yeah, he describes dynamic ad insertion into podcasts as cheap, sloppy, and I don't even know how he talks, so I can't even do an impersonation of him, as something that continues to degrade the experience for listeners. He was ranting in a tweet. What do you think, James?
You should listen to the ATP podcast. It's very good, and then you'll know exactly what he sounds like. But no, I'm not going to do an impersonation.
Okay.
I think that badly done, in the same way as everything, badly done dynamic ad insertion is bad. Well done dynamic insertion is good. For example, I listen to a bunch of podcasts here in Australia, some done by Southern Cross Austereo, by SCA, and they are awful at dynamic ad insertion. I've no idea what system they end up using, but the levels are all over the place, and it's just a bad experience. Whereas Acast, an email tells me, is brilliant. It's just everything works and works very well, and they seem to fill the spots, and it just works well. So I agree that Marco is, is a little bit annoyed about some of the experience of DAI, but I would probably point to that not necessarily being a problem with DAI, it's a problem with some of the implementations of it.
Yeah, I think he's more angry because end users come to him to say how bad the experience is, and he's going, it's not my fault, it's to do with the podcaster. So that's where I think he was getting angry about it. But he's right, badly done is badly done, right? It doesn't matter whether it's audio, DAI or video. So
yeah. No, agreed.
Now, Reddit is I say it in that tone because Reddit is to start live audio talks, much like Twitter or Clubhouse.
Do you use Reddit? Are you a Redditor, Sam?
No, I
Oh.
I haven't got the bandwidth.
I'm a Redditor. I enjoy it. It's quite sort of rough and tumble, but I very much enjoy it. At the moment, in the Brisbane subreddit, which is always good for a read, somebody took a photograph of a strange-looking fish in a creek not so far away from me. And this has spawned lots of people posting things in the water going, what sort of fish is this that I've just seen in the creek? And it's very amusing. But yes, they are to start live audio talks. Ariel Nissenblatt, friend of the show, host of the show, has said. The difference, though, and I think this is interesting, is that instead of just being promoted to people who are your friends, it's being promoted to people that follow subreddits on the topic that your talk is about. So that could be millions of people. You know, if you're doing something which is about business, it will appear basically for anybody that's following any business subreddit at all. And I think that's quite interesting. And they are, by the looks of things, editorially curating these are things as well. There's even a form to fill out if you're interested in hosting them. So, maybe they might get them right, but there again, nobody else has really got these things right so far, have they?
Well, it goes back to, what Mitch is doing with Lit and what the Podcast Index is doing, live item tags and live podcasting has a space, and whether it's Twitter Spaces or Clubhouse or Audio Talks, clearly there is an audience demand for live broadcasting, but, it's not for everyone.
I think there is an audience demand, but it's a small audience demand. Yeah. Adam Curry sent us a boost this week. Thank you, Adam. 5,000 sats from CurioCaster. And he says, with the chat room and with Boostergrams, it's like having a studio audience. And he was saying in the Podcasting 2.0 podcast this week that actually it's a programming decision, basically, to get that feedback rather than a distribution one, and I can kind of see that. I think that makes a bunch of sense. So, and certainly if you're the type of entertainer who would like a studio audience, then you can see that would work quite nicely. So it'll be interesting to see, whether Reddit talks do as well, stroke badly, as Clubhouse or indeed Twitter. That said, I listened to a very good Twitter space this morning, which was one of these podcasting power hour things. And, there were some interesting people on there, including Kayla from Sounds Profitable. And she was talking about using YouTube Shorts, which apparently are the future. So I was taking notes. So, well worth, taking a peek at those sorts of things.
And can I just point out, a strange-looking fish in Australia, really? I mean, the country that has every weird animal.
Yeah, I know, but at least it's not trying to kill you, which is always a benefit. Message Heard has signed an audio partnership with the Kyiv Independent, which is interesting. They're Ukraine's biggest independent English language media outlet. And that will focus on insider stories coming from within Ukraine, told by those at the centre of the conflict. It's a good company to get involved with. So it'll be interesting to watch what comes out of that.
Yeah, I spoke to Jake a little bit about it. His father was in the military and he's doing some work with some UK military guys as well. So some very interesting stuff to come out of that very soon.
Ah, very nice. Sports podcaster Blue Wire, they're the one that's based in Las Vegas. They have raised a further $2.5 million. But they say that they'll be profitable by next year, which is nice. Kevin Jones, who's the company founder, says that they should be getting 124 million downloads this year. Now, so far they've raised $11.4 million. So what does that mean? How much money are they getting per download? That would be an interesting thing to work out. But that's quite a substantial amount of cash going into Blue Wire. But they seem to be doing things, which is nice.
Yeah, so long as he doesn't put it all on red or black, he'll be fine. Now, Descript, a product that I quite like, launched Storyboard last night. They claim it's their biggest ever update. I watched the launch with the team over there. They've got a redesign of Descript for video, so the focus here is very much on the video side of editing rather than the audio side of editing. It looks very slick. I'm going to have to spend a little bit of time, I think, having to learn it. In the same way that when Descript first came out with audio editing, you look at it, it has that wow, oh, isn't that easy? And then you realise, yeah, some of it's not as easy as you think, and you have to get under the hood. I think with the video thing they've done, it makes it look a little bit like a PowerPoint presentation, putting it together, decks and slides and scripts, and the transitions and the stock photography. I'm sure that once you start to use it, you'll be able to create some stuff fairly quickly, and then you'll find, like all these things, the Pareto rule, the 20% that you thought was easy, and then the 80% that actually is hard is underneath the hood. But I'll get my sleeves rolled up and try it.
Yes, excellent. Well, it sounds interesting. It'll be nice when they finally send me a press release. And then I'll be able to cover it. But that sounds really good. Let's move on to the tech stuff. And Antennapod, which is a really nice podcast player for Android, for real phones. Antennapod has just released version 2.6.1, which if you're a fan of this show, then you should be at least trying, because they're now supporting Podcasting 2.0 chapters. There's a number of other improvements under the hood. I played around with it. It's a really nice, polished thing, but it's all open. And the nice thing about it is that it searches, when you search for a podcast, it searches 3 different podcast directories. So not just Apple or not just Podcast Index. It has a nice blended search and has quite a few nice features. So it's really nice. If you're a fan of good-looking UX, it's probably worth giving that a go if you're on Android. Antennapod, which you'll find in Google Play. And on the iPhone, if you're a fan of fruit-based phones, then iOS 16 is going to add bigger podcast artwork on the lock screen. Ooh, said everybody.
Said the short-sighted person.
Are you excited about bigger podcast artwork on the lock screen there, Sam?
As I get older, it'd be easy to read it. Yeah, that's about it. Maybe that's what's happened. The interesting thing I had a really good discussion about it, and this is probably slightly tangential, but Android versus iOS, is as governments start to dip into getting data out of tech companies, Apple are doubling down on privacy and locking a number of features into the phone that means governments can't snoop and pry on you. I do think there's going to be a bigger push back, strangely, to iOS as a platform, because, certainly in America, with states demanding data on locations of people. Google, I think this week, has promised they will not provide the government with location data for women going to abortion centres.
Yeah, but, at the end of the day, they got no choice if they need to abide by US law. So I think it'll be really interesting to see what happens there. I have to say, although I love my Pixel phone, my Pixel Pro phone, it's got a very good camera on it and everything else, I am finding myself more and more eyeing up iPhones. And I think partially that's because I'm really enjoying having an iPad Mini 6, which is my relaxation tool of choice. And I'm there going, I wonder if I should try the dark side, try a toy phone for a little bit. But can you just imagine what Zach from Apple PR is thinking now? I must tell Tim Apple.
He's rubbing his hands.
Anyway, moving on. Podcast hosting company Disctopia has launched video podcast hosting. Hooray! Yes, more video podcasting, this time on the Disctopia platform. If you are a video podcaster on there, then you'll also be able to use their deep reporting and analytics, something that they call True Play, which is very cool. And Eddie, which is kind of a Descript competitor from Headliner, they are also letting you edit video as well. They've released a big upgrade to it this week, which makes it also faster and more stable, according to the company.
Boostergram corner. I can't get more top 40 than that.
Now it's that time again, indeed. Boostergram corner.
Last week, a new all-time record was set for the largest boost on Fountain. Somebody, sent a 1.7 million sats, or $218 at today's Bitcoin price. That is amazing. Wow.
Yeah, that's quite a thing. $218 as a Don't use the word tip because Adam Curry will hate it. But as a bit of value back, do we know who JLT80X sent that to? We don't, do we really? They're just in the leaderboard on Fountain Baller Boosts. But $218 is a good old... Oh, we do, because the artwork is for that particular show. Yes, it is. It's Mo Facts with Adam Curry, and the reason why I couldn't find it is that they've spelled the word facts incorrectly. Moving on, our own boostergrams. We had a nice first, a very nice, polite boost from Bisaya podcast, haven't we there, Sam?
Yeah, it says Sam and James of Podland are one of my favourite interviews with experts. I love how they highlight even the most intricate detail and make it digestible for their listeners. I also appreciate their level of expertise and the quality of information. Because of Podland, I'm using the Fountain app to support other podcasters. Thank you and well done. Thanks.
That's a very nice thing. Loving the show, Steve. That's a very nice thing. So thank you for that. Also, Moaz for sending us 6 sats. Well, you know, it's every little sat matters. And he says nice with a thumbs up. So thank you for that. Adam has sent us a number of different sats. This is Adam Curry, of course. 2,222 sats from Fountain, all the twos. And he says you can't do fractional money with fiat. Talking about cryptocurrencies and currency. It's also not programmable. App developers also need to participate in value for value. Well, I would agree with app developers participating. I think you can do fractional money with fiat, and I think that fiat is programmable. It's certainly programmable in this country, where most of the banks have full APIs which are open, and you can do fantastic things with it. In terms of fractional micropayments, yeah, kind of. But there again, if you put $5 in a box somewhere, then you can produce fractional amounts of that. Which you can then send, on a weekly or monthly basis. So, yeah, I'm not so sure, but I kind of understand where you're coming from. So, Adam, thank you for that. And also for your bigger boosts of 20,000 sats boosting for Fountain from Curiocaster. Thank you. And another 5,000 sat. So, thank you. We do appreciate that. And I'm looking forward to meeting Adam Curry face-to-face in Dallas. Coming up next month. Mary Oscar sent us a boost as well, I think, Sam.
Yeah, thanks for having me on, Sam. It was my pleasure, Mary. Great product, doing great things with it, so really enjoyed the interview.
And Dave Jones sent us a big rush boost. Good interviews this week. Ariel did a good job. She did an excellent job. I have lots of questions on the sample size of the creators study, particularly the female-male ratio just doesn't seem to pass the smell test. And Dave was saying something similar on the Podcasting 2.0 podcast this week. That's probably one for Tom Webster, I'll tell you. But I was not necessarily particularly surprised by the female-male ratio. I think I was a bit more surprised by seeing that podcast creators are just as diverse, if not more so, than the rest of the than the normal US audience. I found that quite interesting. I'm not quite sure, that goes against what we've been told in the past. So I think it'll be really interesting seeing, it's going to be an annual thing, so I think it'll be really interesting seeing the creators' data from next year to see whether there's wild changes or whether it says much the same sort of thing. Dave, thank you for that. I appreciate it.
Now, an interesting question that I'm not sure I have the answer to, but you might, James. Boosting in advance to see if you know the answer or can find out. I realised Apple's new proxy doesn't allow listeners to see more than 2,000 episodes in a feed, even if they subscribe/follow. Is this a bug or on purpose because it will change my strategy? This seems to be affecting Overcast as well. Thanks from Justin at Optimal Living Daily.
Yeah, I don't know about Overcast, but I do know about Apple Podcasts because I can tell you exactly when they relaxed it. Back in March of 2021, they used to have a 300 episode limit in Apple Podcasts. and they relaxed that to 2,000 episodes. It's the latest 2,000 episodes, and they rolled that out, whatever the beta version of iOS was, back in March 2021. Yes, 2000 is a feature, or at least it's as designed and not a bug. I would personally, I would use paging in your RSS, but also, I do know that quite a few people are putting additional shows, old shows, onto an archive on their website and only listing the last 2,000 or so. I think I list 500, I think. But anyway, listing those in your RSS feed. So I hope that helps, Justin. But yes, I was curious myself, so did little bits of research. Look at that. It's very unlike me. Dan B has sent us 100 sats. Thank you. If this works, then shout out to Oscar at Fountain. Been meaning to give this a try for a while, but couldn't be. Oh, look, you're testing the bleeper again. Funding a crypto wallet, so the pay to listen is a nice, easy way to onboard. And that's from Dan from Beyond the Podcast. Dan, thank you. Yes, I think streaming sats is really quite interesting, and it's something that I'm working to get a little bit more visible in the Helipad app. So thanks for that. And we've got two more. We've got lots of these, haven't we? It's almost as if I've been on holiday for the last 2 weeks.
Yeah, we've got one from Kyron at Mere Mortals. I'm not sure I'd bother with playlists for your show on YT, James.
That's YouTube, yeah.
Yeah, we've been doing this since day dot, and the amount of views driven from there is really quite small. I'd be interested if you'd be able to automate that, though.
Yeah, well, I'll be interested to see if I can be bothered. But Kyron, thank you. Yes, I'm not sure I'd bother doing playlists personally, but you might find that useful for the large amount of podcasts that you end up doing.
Well, I think, James, you were talking about, YouTube Shorts, and I think looking at the amount of platforms that we've talked about this week that are beginning to support video, such as Podverse, Eddie, Descript, tools that are coming out that are going to make it easier. It does feel like we're, building up to a movement towards more video, because the ability to create them, even if it's just snippets from shows. In fact, if you look at TikTok, with the adoption of a lot of video in there, a lot of the podcasters that I see in TikTok are taking the talking heads like we have here and taking just a 2-minute snippet, and they're using that as audiograms or videograms to push out to endpoints, and that may well drive better traffic engagement rather than the whole show.
Yeah, I think so. Kayla was saying much the same sort of thing in the Twitter Spaces that I was listening to, and was basically saying, that actually she was getting tremendous views from some of the YouTube Shorts that she was doing. So, so maybe YouTube are prioritizing YouTube Shorts. I think there's some research out today saying that young people are using TikTok more than they are YouTube, which is quite a thing. So, so certainly worthwhile keeping an eye on. And finally, Mike McCallan from the podcastingforassociations.com. He says, I enjoy the podcast. I'm sorry I'm not sending more sats. Still trying to figure out how to add them to my Fountain app. I'm not the clearest mic in the studio, so to speak. Mike, thank you so much for doing that. I see what you did there. And we appreciate any sats, so that's very kind of you. And thank you very much.
Now, on next week's show, one of our guests is going to be Moritz, who's the CEO and co-founder of Olby. I can't tell you too much until next week, but we will be talking about the new API that they're bringing out, and one very lucky partner that they're going to use it with. So it looks like, that next hurdle, Mike, that you're struggling with, which is how to work out how to get a wallet and how to put sats in it. Hopefully Moritz is going to tell us next week that hurdle now has become much lower. So it's going to be easier for you to have a wallet, add fiat currency to it, and start boosting.
Listen to you throwing forward. I'm most impressed. It's almost as if you've done this before. A few events coming up, aren't there? There's the British Podcast Awards, which I think you're going to in Kennington in London on the 23rd of July.
Yeah, I've taken out my mortgage, £90 a ticket. Yep, I'm going though.
Well, Matt needs to Mike needs to get his money somehow.
Well, now he's married, he does.
There's, there's also Podfest in Berlin. Yes, not that Podfest. That's on July the 16th in Germany, of course. Podcast Movement in Dallas in Texas, which I'm going to, August the 23rd to the 20-something. Very much looking forward to being on the Podcast Academy stand, booth, I should say, which I'm looking forward to doing for 2 whole hours straight. So that's going to be fun. And I'm also taking part in a live new media show at the event as well. Watch out for the postcard in your Podcast Movement goodie bag to find out more about that. There's also Radio Days Asia in September. In Kuala Lumpur, which is worthwhile going to, and a bunch of others, aren't there, Sam?
Yeah, International Women Podcast Awards are coming up here in London on September the 29th. Tickets are available. You can attend in person, and there is also a virtual stream as well.
There's Podcast Day 24, which is happening in Sydney, in London, and New York, which is giving me slight stress at the moment. We have announced our first speakers, and that's on October the 4th. And finally, the London Comedy Podcast Festival, called Cheerful Earful, is on in South London, mate, 6th to the 9th of October, and lots of podcasts taking part, including Comfort Blanket, which I'm a big fan of, from Joel Morris, which is a wonderful, warm podcast, which everybody should go and have a listen to, and Richard Herring's Rahalistapa. So some great podcasts worthwhile taking a peek at. I think they're at cheerfulearful.co.uk or something similar, but if not, you'll find it all at the Pod News website.
Yeah, I will be going to that one. And if you want to find more events, do check out pod.events on James's website.
Yes, I hear it's very good. Lots of new people at Acast. In the UK and Ireland. There's new business directors and directors of sales and stuff. Josh Woodhouse is the regional managing director. He had actually been doing that job for a bit after they lost their previous managing director to go to Acast US. So it's good to see that Josh will be the person sending the emails from Acast in the UK and Ireland in future. How to make friends, James, and influence people. And also, Spotify has lost one of their 4,287 PR people, Kevin Turner. Used to be Spotify's global head of podcast communications, and he has just started at Linktree as VP of communications. So Kevin that's a bit of a loss for podcasting, really. He's worked for Spotify and Gimlet for 6 years now, but Linktree are kind of getting into podcasting, so it'll be interesting to see what Kevin ends up doing. So what's happening for you this week in Podland, Sam?
Well, apart from meeting you and your lovely family in Marlow, which we did.
Yes,
so
that's
thanks.
very nice. And a cup of tea and a cake.
Indeed.
I think.
Yes. We didn't splash out too much, but it was lovely to meet them both. Yeah, I got one of those odd awards. I've been made one of the top 100 Asians in tech in the UK. God knows what I'll do with it, and God knows where I'll put it. But there you go. I got one of those this week.
Very nice.
Yeah, no idea why. And then the other one was, more importantly, my eldest daughter graduated from university, so we had the graduation ceremony.
Ah, excellent. What was she reading? Is that what you asked?
The I didn't know what to do degree.
Books is clearly the answer.
Yeah, it's the I didn't know what to do degree. Mum and Dad, what did you do? I'll do that then. That's fine. So yeah, she's qualified in business and marketing. So well done to Sophia. And strangely, within a week she got her first job. So that £50,000 debt can start to be paid off soon.
Excellent. Well, as long as she just eats pot noodles for the next year, then she should be fine. I had good fun being interviewed by Courtney Kosak, who interviewed me for her newsletter Podcast Bestie, which one person on Twitter called Podcast Beastie, which I rather like better. But anyway, I gave some ideas around, making sure that you call your podcast a sensible name. And I also witted on about indie podcasters. Please don't join that gang. You'll find it linked anyway in our show notes. So go and take a peek at that. And apart from that, I've just been doing I've been trying to get over the jet lag since coming back from the UK. It's really hit us as a family, and I think it's probably I get used to jet lag, and so I just power on through. But the rest of the family, gosh, they've been very sleepy, I'll tell you. But there we are. That's it for this week. If you like Podland, tell others to visit. Tell your friends on Twitter, LinkedIn, Facebook, or Weibo.
Indeed, Weibo. Wow. You can also email comments at podland.news or send us boostergrams, which we prefer. You'll also find all our previous shows and interviews on our website at podland.news.
Yes, and if you want daily news, you should get Pod News. The newsletter's free at podnews.net. The podcast can be found in your podcast app. If you're into ad tech and advertising and all that kind of stuff, then soundsprofitable.com is also very good. All the stories we've discussed on Podland today are in the show notes. We use chapters and transcripts too.
Our music is from Ignite Jingles, and we're hosted and sponsored by our good friends Buzzsprout and Squadcast.
Keep listening.